Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the latest episode of Games Up Podcast. My name is Cameron McCulloch-Keeble and that is Lewis. Hello.
Hello there. Hello.
How are you?
Good, good.
Good.
Jolly
Excellent. Jolly good. How very
Jolly
British. Don't go all tracer on me.
No.
All right, love. How's your week been? Good?
Yeah, been chill.
Nice. Chill is a good word.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a good week generally, I would say. So let's start your week off right with this week's indie game. That's a lot of weeks. What's the indie game of the week?
The indie game of the week is Orwell. Orwell is a simulation game made by Osmotic Studios, in which the player assumes the role of a state operative trying to get to the bottom of a mystery. The game is played through like a user interface called Orwell, which very big brothery feeling. You search through imitation Facebook, different news sources, and other social media sources and websites, trying to find information about your target to get to this bottom of this mystery. You only start from a name in a news story, and through investigation, you build up profiles for everyone connected, name, pictures, addresses, friends, and so on and so forth, in order to find and arrest a terrorist. The game does a great job of making you feel rather uncomfortable. You have to kind of go through people's online accounts, imitate their own friends, trick information out of people, and you kind of decide what you actually share with the Orwell system. So you can get to make a choice through the game about whether, a low-level drug operative is actually discovered, or whether you kind of decide that's not actually relevant to the case, or it's not actually relevant to the system. So you're kind of like the person behind Big Brother, It goes as far as to being able to like warn the actual people involved about the SWAT teams that are coming to get them. You can not tell them that the target has a gun, for example. And the great thing about it is just the way that the whole game is played off of social media. So you'll find like an image of, or just like some mention on a blog post about somebody saying, "Oh, I've got a gun in my storage locker" or something. And that's what you share with the system. That's how the game works. It's a really interesting story full of twists and turns. And right now, the game's super cheap. It's available on Steam for just £7.50, and that's both seasons. They're short experiences, but they're really quite entertaining and quite fun.
So both seasons, the game's episodic?
Yes, the game is episodic. Each kind of an hour or so each episode. And yeah, like the second season kind of builds a bit more and has a bit more like options than the first one, but it's very entertaining and it's very it's also kind of not clearly episodic. It's kind of done like each episode is a day. But when you buy the game, you get all of the. It's not like you can't. There's no way of buying one episode. You buy the whole thing. It's just that it comes out in episodes as time goes on.
This sounds awesome. This reminds me a lot of Papers, Please.
Yeah, it is a lot like that.
I love this concept. This might be the first game I look at on this new gorgeous laptop that we showed you all earlier. It's a shame. I'd like to play it on console and stuff, but right now it's only available on PC, Windows, Linux, and Mac. So if you do have a Linux, you can play this, which is good. Yeah, this sounds awesome. Good shout, man.
Yeah, it's a really enjoyable game, and you kind of like you get quite hooked onto it. I find. Especially just the whole twists and turns, like it's the fact that if you don't share certain bits of information, certain things don't happen, certain things do happen. You kind of feel this real power, but also too much power. It's kind of awkward.
That's so cool. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we are wholeheartedly endorsing Orwell this week. That's both Orwell Keeping an Eye on You and Orwell Ignorance is Strength. Go and have a look at them. Go and have a play at them. Tweet the developer. Tell them we sent you, I guess, if you do play it. And tell us what you think of it, because I really want to play this game. Tell me if I should pick it up. That, ladies and gentlemen, was our Indie Game of the Week, and now we shall start on the weekly news. Firstly, Phil Spencer talked at this week's DICE Summit. If you don't know what the DICE Summit is, it's basically a big event for lots of game developers across the world where there's award ceremonies and developer talks, and it's a real sort of inside baseball part of the industry. It's a big collection of devs sort of sharing their knowledge and patting each other on the back in a good way. And he talked about the work he's done at Microsoft and quite openly talked about the stuff he's done behind the scenes at Microsoft. Lewis, I think you paid more attention to this than maybe I did this week, so do you want to share your thoughts on this with me?
Yeah. So he came out and said kind of a whole collection of things. There's a very long speech by Spencer. And one of the big focuses of that speech is that Microsoft felt that they weren't, or Xbox felt that they weren't doing a good job of communicating to both its consumers and within its own business. Morale across the team had been hit very, very high, very low, and everyone was quite frustrated because they felt like they were missing trends. They were missing kind of the good marketing that they could get, and they were frustrated, and the team was frustrated. So one of the things that they've said is, one of the things that Phil was saying is that they feel like Microsoft needed a reboot. They needed to kind of restart what they were doing, restart how they communicated with everyone. And that's kind of what Phil's been trying to do while he's been in business, it seems, while he's been in charge. There's a few different examples on there of like different times when he felt that Microsoft had kind of failed to communicate very well.
So my question to you is, do you think from a public-facing way, do you think he's done this?
I think Microsoft is doing a better job, and they are gaining in terms of public support, but at the same time they're still very divided on the games front. I think if they came out and were like, here, we've got games coming, they'll be in such a better place quite quickly, I think. Because I think they already have a lot of support for the Game Pass, and the way that they've communicated more recently in the last few years with customers has done really well. It's received really well. People do like sing their virtues in terms of not games. But as it's clear, it's maybe not enough.
I know you say that kind of jokingly, but actually I think that's a perfect summary of it, is they have done a lot of improvement in terms of the industry side of things and how they talk about themselves as a company and as a product and as the people behind the product. There was a huge amount of confusion when the Xbox One came out about what it would be and how much backpedaling there was, and I think you're totally right in that in all ways except the way they actually necessarily need, they've kind of done a really good job of cleaning things up. I don't know that I'm not Phil Spencer's biggest fan, but I'm more critical of him than I've ever been. And I hope the next few years go to show the actual kind of tangible improvements and knock-on effects if this work has been done, if that makes sense.
I think, not to bring up the E3, but I think that'll be the real thing that'll show us where this is going.
I mean, yeah, I hope so, kind of.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was Phil Spencer at the DICE Summit. Also, the DICE Awards happened this week. They were hosted by Greg Miller of Kind of Funny and Jessica Choba of Nerdist. Good things generally all around. Go and have a look at who won those. There's some great developers getting great praise and highly deserved. So that was cool. Number 2 this week is that there is no sequel planned for Rainbow Six Siege as the active player base has grown since launch, something that very rarely happens. This is actually also true of For Honor as well, which announced this week. So Ubisoft doing good at growing those player bases. But the plan instead is to keep improving it, keep adding to it so that it becomes more of a service that encourages more people to jump on board. It's a massive turnaround for that game.
Yeah.
My thought on this is, controversial isn't the right word, but I think it's going to be taken badly. We have to kind of appreciate that this is a really good reason for the whole games as a service argument. A lot of the industry right now and a lot of the fan perspective right now is saying that games as a service is a bad thing. It's turning games from something fun and hobbyist into a full 100% industry. And I agree, I think games should be game first, service second. But there is a definite argument that games like this and The Division and For Honor and to some extent GTA Online, Overwatch, so on and so forth, are perfect examples of how a game as a service can actually better serve its player base than before.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good to see games that are able to kind of improve over time. I guess the other thing you have to wonder, though, is whether some of these games, I don't particularly know about Rainbow Six Siege, but some of the games of service maybe weren't finished enough at the start, and maybe that's another reason why something's kind of improved over time. I think probably like the original Battlefront is a good example of that. The original EA's Battlefront, last one, which released with not much content, but then it kind of got more content as time went on. So it's kind of, I'm in two minds about that.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. And I, on the other side, like, GTA Online, sorry's most recent content drop turned me super off from it, and that's an example of where sometimes you'll lose one or two consumers, and perhaps that will add up to something bigger over time. But we don't know. Speaking of Battlefront, as you did, another piece of news came out this week that Disney is perhaps looking at other developers to take over the Star Wars contract after being disappointed in the controversy that was caused by the Star Wars Battlefront 2 loot boxes. This is pretty big because EA seems to be going through quite the tumultuous year at the minute, with rumours abounding that Microsoft is looking at buying somebody, and EA may well be in the crosshairs to lose the Star Wars license and have it taken away forcefully by LucasArts, as would need to happen, would be a massive blow for them, especially with the amount of stuff they've put into building the studios like Motive and so on and so forth around these projects. Do you think this is going to happen? Do you think this giant piece of video game news is predictable, Lewis? Tell me.
I don't think it's going to happen.
I'm with you.
Because I think ultimately, while the press is bad, the game's still done well, and I think that's I think that's probably more important to them.
I think EA is going to have to prove themselves, and I think they're not going to keep the license without a fight, because Star Wars is in a very, very weird place at the minute, especially as a film franchise where you have a couple of people holding the reins super tight and for the right reasons. Kathleen Kennedy has done a miracle to that franchise. Like, you think at where it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago with the... 20 years ago? 15-ish. 15-ish years ago with the prequels. It was in a dire state. And now it's the poster boy for popcorn franchises year on year. Like, Kathleen Kennedy has done a miraculous thing to that franchise, and they're not going to risk having that not be the case in video games. But I think that EA can make too good a case for keeping it, i.e. we've got these projects in development, we've done this, that, the other. Yes, the sales are there. We've got all this talent behind it. You don't employ Amy Hennig, Jade Raymond, and half the people at Motive for nothing. And I do think ultimately that will speak in their favour, but I do think they're probably going to have to behind-the-scenes fight for this a bit.
Yeah.
In another piece of news this week, it was announced that Swery65 is announcing a new project called The Missing, meant to be launching for consoles this year. According to your notes on the news story, Lewis, the game sounds vague and dumb, and nothing has been announced about it. He's going to be...
I'll explain it. So he did an interview.
Oh. Sorry, I jumped in on you there. Carry on.
Cut all that out. He did an interview saying, like, you know what it's like when you miss something, or maybe you miss a place, or you miss somebody, or miss some... Yeah. Basically, like, he looked up missing in a dictionary and just read out that. So information-wise, there's very little about the game. But I can tell you with absolute certainty that it involves something missing.
Wow. I would love it if the entire game is a gun that you can't aim. It's like
show me
the prank gun in Borderlands where you just can't hit anything.
Yeah.
He's also going to be releasing a Kickstarter in March for The Good Life, which is still alive after failing to reach its funding goal on Fig. This is really interesting because Fig is one of those platforms where it definitely should work. Like, Kickstarter is a weird thing because when you buy something on Kickstarter or you fund something on Kickstarter, what you're doing is funding a project that either there's no market demand for, or the market demand can't be proved enough for at the minute that they decided to go straight to Kickstarter. Sometimes that works. I will show you an example. I recently bought a new wallet. I absolutely love it, but there are loads of people who don't on the same Kickstarter, so you really take a risk in purchasing something like that. Whereas Fig, if you purchase enough of it, you become a stakeholder in that product. So if there is enough of a market, you will make money potentially from the success of that game. Now, I think that means that Fig should be more successful because there's like an established business model there for how the funding works, how the market share works, how this gets shared out works. And I think that actually speaks to the quality of a game. I don't think you can put trash on Fig because you will owe people money to some extent. And I think that's probably quite worrying for Swery, because if you have to go from a site that's entire MO is we will treat this like a proper business, we will treat this like proper stakeholders, and you will be responsible to them, to Kickstarter, where to some extent there's a little bit more airiness and there's a little bit less tangibility about what this project can be from when it's created to when it actually launches. That kind of speaks to a failure in the game or a failure in the pitch.
Yeah, and I think you have to remember that in terms of Fig, like, the way it works is like you get return from the profits, I believe, of some sort. And so it kind of shows that people aren't really supportive of Swery, or at least in terms of, like unsure if they're going to get their investment back. And that is worrying. It shows that there's maybe less support for Swery than might be thought. It's not too surprising to my mind, but we can talk about that in a bit.
Yeah, I think this will lead on quite nicely to our topic of the week in a minute. The next piece of news this week is that a new Battlefield will be playable at EA Play, which is EA's E3 thing. That's difficult to say. They announced all the details of that this week, and it's not being part of E3, but it's happening at the same time. It's separate. It's in a conference centre. It's exactly how they've done it the last couple of years. Nothing surprising there. But what is surprising is that we may be getting a trailer for it in the coming week, if not a little bit longer. The guy working on the trailer, or a video editor at DICE, the studio who are making it, said that we should be expecting it soon. And if it's in the editing stages, that means it's in the final stages of being created. So expect some big news on Battlefield, probably this week. I'd put money on it.
Oh, okay.
From just to talk around this a little bit, I'm slightly skeptical about what this will be. I think they're going to have real trouble going back to like a modern shooter thing, because COD's kind of got that bit cornered now, especially after they did Battlefield 1. I'd like to see them do World War 2, but it wouldn't be different enough. I think they're going to have a tough time on their hands selling this.
I think they're going to do World War 2.
Yeah?
And I think so. I don't know. I mean, they're always chasing each other. That's the truth of it. So I think it's likely we'll see something like that. It's likely, I think, that they were already in development for something like that before they found out about Call of Duty doing it.
Very potentially.
We'll find out soon.
The final piece of news this week is that Metal Gear Survive released this week, though most people probably didn't know that, and it's released quite badly. A lot of fans have come out with a lack of support of it, both for the lack of Kojima and the way the game actually plays and its sort of central theme. But there's also been a huge amount of response that's negative in terms of its microtransactions and loot boxes. You can, in fact, pay more for meaningless add-on content in the centre of the game than the game itself, right out the gate at launch. This leads us, along with the Swery 65 news, to ask our topic of the week is, do we need game auteurs? What is auteur theory in video games, and is it a good thing? To give you a little bit of context, if you don't know about auteur theory is that in every medium, whether it be film, books, music, video games, so on and so forth, there are people who push the medium further by defining a style and making that style their own. So, for example, Hitchcock is an auteur, Tim Burton is an auteur, Christopher Nolan would be considered a modern auteur. In music, you might have Prince as an auteur, the Beatles are auteurs, and then in classical music, you'd have Bach as an auteur, you'd have Handel as an auteur, so on and so forth. In video games, arguably auteurs include Tim Schafer, Hideo Kojima, Peter Molyneux, Miyazaki, David Jaffe, and so I think we should have a discussion about whether auteurs are a good thing in video games.
Sounds like a very good idea.
It does. It's almost like you wrote it.
It is.
All right, Mr. Crawford, what do you think?
Oh, okay. So it's a big question to say whether it's good or bad. I think there are very much two different camps that auteurs can go into. And you have maybe, let's say, consistent ideas and inconsistent ideas. Someone like Miyazaki with the handling of Dark Souls does really well because they have like a consistent image, a consistent idea, a consistent kind of thought throughout the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the things that an auteur can give you that other other people can't. Like having someone in charge of writing, someone in charge of directing, someone in charge of being involved in every single element tends to mean that projects take longer. You know that most auto projects take a lot longer than like other projects, but you end up with something that's hopefully consistent and a good idea. So you see that in certain ways with Kojima's works on Metal Gear Solid. You see something that's kind of consistently good, maybe not consistent in all of the way it's presented, but it's consistently good. And Tim Schafer is another great example of someone who does authoring well. As was Miyazaki with keeping this consistent image, and you can kind of see if you play through the Dark Souls series, when you get to Dark Souls 2, which wasn't directed by him, there's a very big change, a very big directional change in terms of how the game's presented and how the games feel. Ultimately, I think auteurs are good, but I think when you come to someone like Swery and like Molyneux, so Swery's biggest problem is that the guy has amazing ideas, but has too many amazing ideas, if you like. I mean, I'll be honest, it feels a bit like Kojima is like this on Death Stranding, where ultimately you need someone else there to be like, no, that's ridiculous, you need to do it something differently, you need editing here. Because as someone who played... Did you play Dark Dreams Don't Die?
No.
I believe it was free on Xbox. You should have got it.
I own it. I just haven't played it.
If it's an interesting experience, that game's directed by Swery 65, and it's a mess of ideas. Okay, to put it nicely, it's a mess of ideas. While being consistently good, it's also a complete mess. And I think like that's the real problem where auteur theory falls down, is that ultimately it depends on how consistent your auteur is and how good your ideas from your auteur are. Because it's the same thing that lets you end up with completely strange, bizarre films. It's the same thing that lets you kind of end up with completely strange, bizarre games when you have an auteur involved.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm kind of torn on. I guess I'm not torn on auteur theory. Auteur theory is the case, but I am torn on a lot of the people who get overhyped, I suppose, as auteurs. I don't really like Kojima. I think he makes incredible games. I also think that there's only like so many times you can watch Naked Snake dramatically climb on a horse before you're taking the piss. And I think that's the problem with a lot of auteurs, is auteurs define a style by doing something that people haven't done yet, and people haven't done it either because it's hard or because there's no need to, and that can be two different things. I totally agree with you that sometimes a good auteur needs editing, and I actually think that sometimes the best creations come out of putting an auteur within a bracket. I think that it's great to see these people creating by their own means and going out and exploring things, but I'll always go to the example of one of my favorite artists, and I know you're fond of him as well in music, is Marilyn Manson. And I love Manson to the end of the world. I love the way he thinks, I love the way he talks about stuff and pictures stuff, but by God, when he's like his own producer, his music is god awful. Like, it's so much better when there's somebody else saying, no, you need this instrument, this song needs to stop here. It's so much better when somebody is able to take those ideas and form them into something that's palatable. And I think that's a problem that video games haven't necessarily come to yet because of a different reason. That different reason, I think, is that auteur theory has to go hand in hand with a business that allows it to exist. You can have auteur theory in video games, but video games are chasing business and money probably harder than entertainment mediums have in their youth for a while. The music industry chased business, but there was also a lot more of a sort of Wild West aspect to it, especially still at this stage. Same for movies, and especially the same for writing, because writing is thousands and thousands of years old. And I would make the argument that, like, a lot of the people we've mentioned so far, Tim Schafer, for example, David Jaffe, for example, Peter Molyneux, for the biggest example, are auteurs that are really damaged by the actual delivery of the product. Like, Peter Molyneux, if he was able to make the games he thinks about, would be a god. But unfortunately, there's an industry involved that has to sell that game because people have to eat. And there's people that have to make that game because that's their work. And I think sometimes the real auteurs are the people who make the best product that isn't revolutionary. Like, I'd say sometimes that Jeff Kaplan from Blizzard is kind of an auteur in the way he's made Overwatch or the way he's directed Overwatch. The guys who made the Arkham trilogy, Rocksteady, are kind of auteurs, but they won't be talked about in the same way as Kojima. And so sometimes it's the names that don't get talked about that are actually more influential than the ones who do.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And I think ultimately with auteurs, you are standing in this place where you can't really say how good something's going to be until it's out. I think a good example is Peter Molyneux, where what I mean is he has gone on record saying amazing things, being like, we're going to make this amazing game. And the problem is that, like, often he has ideas that he can't put down. Because of maybe business reasons or because of just time reasons. I think often business does get in the way of auteuring. We know that with Kojima taking forever to make Metal Gear Solid 5. We know that was part of the reason why Konami wanted to get removed Kojima, was because it was taking too long. Mm-hmm. Swery's D4 game, Dark Dreams Don't Die, never got finished because of Microsoft pulling the plug on it. So ultimately, like, while we can point to these games as being bad examples of auteur maybe not working so well, you can still look at, like, Nier Automata, you can look at Dark Souls series and Bloodborne, and we can see times where having a proper auteur works really well. Mm-hmm. I think it's tough to say whether it's the right thing or not, because I think, for me personally, like, having someone who's in certain games, you can see how having an auteur has meant that, like, one person has this consistent image through every piece of art, for every piece of gameplay, for every piece of like, I don't know, cinematics, whatever. And that's really brought out something amazing in something like, personally, I know we talked about this a while ago, but with Nier Automata, you do get that feeling that the whole thing is made by one guy, with obviously a massive loads of support, and actually, in terms of what he's done compared to what they've done, it's probably more them, but one guy's image has been made, you know. And sometimes I think you need that, and sometimes I think that doesn't work, and it's kind of hard to say until you kind of have the finished product, whether it's one of column A or column B, you know?
Yeah. And I think, like, I think it's worth saying that, you know, you do, to some extent, get that from... So I think auteur theory goes hand in hand with the Wild West of a thing. I think the more something becomes accepted and normalized, the harder it is to be crazy in it, because people have an expectation of what they'll get out of it, which is arguably really sad, but in the other way really good. So, like, I think we're going to see a lot of auteurs come through in VR over the next couple of years. Like, Mike Bithell could do some really cool stuff in VR, or indie developers of that nature. And equally, I think you're going to see a lot more indie auteurs in the indie space, i.e. the Fulbright Company, or the guys behind Papers, Please, or the people who make experiences we haven't seen in AAA before.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that most of the auteur names that we have here, and most of the ones that are famous, are from an old era. So Kojima's very much from the PlayStation 1 days, so is the original God of War. Peter Molyneux was originally Black and White, which is also a very old PC game.
Also a friend of the show. Not Peter Molyneux, Black and White's voice actor, is a friend of the show. Sorry, should clarify.
Yes. Ah, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, so...
I had lunch with him the other day. He's cool.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. But yeah, so You are right to mention that this is like the names. Lots of the names we know are from the West. I just said the Wild Western
Yeah.
time. And obviously, it's worth saying that in the indie space, that's quite true. Actually, most of the indie names that you could mention off the top of your head would most likely be Phil Fish and some of the other big names from the indie scenes. And I don't know if we'll see as much with the indies now in terms of like named creations. But I do think that you're right to mention the VR, and I do think that is a place where we probably will see some auteurs come out.
I also think it's worth bearing in mind that an auteur is never made at the time that they're making stuff. So, like, Spielberg and Hitchcock are thought of auteurs, but when Spielberg released E.T., people weren't like, wow, this guy's the next coming of Jesus. Christopher Nolan is a modern-day auteur. Sorry, I should clarify. I speak in films. That's what I do kind of in my day-to-day. Sorry. Christopher Nolan is a modern-day auteur, but he's made so many films at this point that you can point to it. He's probably not going to make many more, one or two at a push. And so he can be considered an auteur because you can look at his body of work and go, wow, okay, that dude knew what he was doing. And so I think we're going to have more auteurs in the VR and in the indie space, but I think we probably won't know about them for a good few years. Like the guys who made Superhot, for example, I personally think Superhot is like one of the leading VR experiences just for what it does and how you interact with it. And I think if their next game is as good and as clear a concept, they are making a very good case for themselves being the auteurs of VR, or certainly the start of it. But it won't be until a good game or two or three afterwards at which you can turn to look at their body of work and go, wow, look at the legacy that follows these people. And I think if you're an auteur after one thing, you're a crapshoot. Because you're either going to make that again and be a genuine legacy, or you had one idea that you did well. There are so many bands, artists, filmmakers, game developers, so on and so forth, who have one great idea. And that doesn't mean that everything else they make is bad, but it doesn't live up to that. There are, like, this is an odd reference to it, but I'll go with it anyway. The Fratellis, their first album, Costello Music, is one of the best albums of, I would say, the last couple of decades. Everything that followed it is good. That's not being an auteur. Tim Burton's first 7 films are auteur-worthy. Everything he's done with drunk Johnny Depp afterwards, probably not. And there's a very fine point where somebody falls off from being that talented. And so you do have to look at somebody's body of work as a legacy rather than ongoing, and whether it's a good thing. So Death Stranding could be the thing that cements Kojima for the next decade, or makes you wonder what the fuck the dude's smoking. And I guess that's kind of a risk with having anyone on that kind of pedestal as the greatest of their, or the greatest or most influential of their peers, because, I mean, they're human creators at the end of the day. They're fallible just as much as anyone else.
Yeah, and I think, if anything, it's worth saying that, yeah, you've got human creators that are fallible, but you live and die by that one image that an author has.
Yes, 100%.
You know, having a team involved means that, I think this is one of the ultimate reasons for me why I like auteurs, specifically at the moment, Yoko Taro, because of Nier Automata, is that you make something that wouldn't be made by a committee. But that's works both ways. You make something that's very original, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's very good.
Ooh, I would argue with you there.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I don't think a committee can't be auteurs.
I think that if you have any idea by committee, you're going to end up being further away from the extremes. So you won't have anything that's drastically bad, but not bad and good is a bad measure. You won't have anything that's like drastically unoriginal, but you won't end up with something that's drastically original, if you like.
I can see what you mean by that.
I guess my main point is the committees, or if you like, big teams like, I don't know, development at Microsoft, will go for things that they know are, especially in the business world, this is the important part, will go for things that are safer. And I think that's kind of, having an author in charge means that you're less likely to be going for something like the safer way, or the way that will please the most people, if you like. My
argument in response to that would be that stuff that's made by committee will, like, 9 times out of 10 be safer, yes, and profitable, yes. But it's the 1 time out of 10 that committee is special. If, for example, the next 4 Assassin's Creed games are all on the level of Origins, you have to make the case that the people behind that, regardless of how big the team that made it is, are working towards authorship. And I would argue that the team who made the original sets of Assassin's Creed, I would say everything from Assassin's Creed 1 to Revelations is auteur level creation. I just think that we have it in our heads a bit, especially as we're in a weird place as people, because we were born at the beginning or mid-90s, so we're taking in media from the 80s and the 70s where there were these shooting from the hip one people creative teams, but we've come up in a world where creation has become a lifestyle and a thing you can do for money, and so there are teams and safety nets behind it. And I think we kind of expect that it's the lone gunman creatives who make the most interesting thing, but that's not necessarily always the case. Like, sometimes it's when you get the right team of people funding it and talent behind it that's not necessarily one person, but is a company or a conglomerate that can employ the right people and give the right funding to a project, that something can truly become magical from it.
Yeah, okay.
I feel like this was a really pretentious discussion.
Oh, no, it's not.
So my question to you is, this is a weird one, but go with me. Who is your favourite auteur? Who do you think is totally overrated?
Okay.
I can start if you like.
Okay. Yeah, good, because I'll give an opposite answer to you, so that's fine.
Okay. My favourite auteur is Ken Levine.
Yeah, okay.
I think Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite and the stuff that came before it and the stuff that will come after it is absolute masterwork. And I don't think you make that many games without having a good idea of how to make those kind of games. I think Kojima is highly overrated. I like the games he makes. I think they're made very well. But I think there are games made equally well in the hands of other people who aren't, like, given entire stages at press conferences just to walk.
Okay. Okay, my favorite auteur probably is Kojima, but it's kind of via playing all the games that he's made. So it's kind of because I would jump up and defend Yoko Taro, but I've only actually played Nier Automata, and you're right that you can only really judge something by consistent works as opposed to something that they've done once, as far as you're concerned. I think Swery 65 is really overrated. Like, I do not believe the person has ever made a good game. Harsh as it is. People are quite often singing his virtues, but I just don't think he's ever made like a complete game. Kojima has a mess of ideas, and it's clear that you have a mess of ideas, and hopefully something good comes from it. Mm-hmm. I feel like Swery is very much the opposite. He has a mess of ideas, and nothing comes of it.
And what about in other things? Are you particularly fond of any authors in other, like, music and films and so on?
You've come at me tough there.
I ask the hard questions. It's what I'm known for.
Yeah, watching a lot of Kubrick.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of movies, music, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kubrick's a really good shout. Kubrick is. It's kind of baffling how talented he was.
Mm.
And this is a very pretentious sentence, but I stand by it. I said when Interstellar came out, that I think people will look back on Christopher Nolan as the Kubrick of his time, and I genuinely believe that. I think Christopher Nolan is the single most vibrant, talented, brilliant filmmaker I've seen in years. And I would argue he is absolutely top of his game. I think coming up right now, Denis Villeneuve, however you say his name, who made Arrival and then Blade Runner 2049, is making an incredible case for himself being a considered an auteur. And if the next film he makes, which is Dune, which is going to be one hell of a task, but if he makes that to anywhere near the quality of Blade Runner, that man can... I mean, he can retire a god at that point. That's incredible. In terms of music, I think, as I said, Marilyn Manson, when he's given enough freedom not to hang himself, that sounded a lot darker than I meant it. I mean, when he's given enough rope to do the right in terms of his productions, is absolutely an auteur. And I think Gerard Way as well. He gets written off a lot as kind of He gets written off a lot as like the popular vote because MCR were hugely popular, but I think you don't make 4 solid concept albums that are so vibrant and drastically different to the rest without having something, and I think he still has that thing. So that was good. Go check all those people out if you haven't already. Not that you haven't heard of them, obviously. Thanks very much for joining us for this latest pretty deep conversation on Games Up podcast. Who are your favourite auteurs? You can always let us know, and you can let us know in a number of places. We have a Facebook page and a Twitter page. Both of those are at Games Upcast, or just search Games Upcast on both and we'll come up. You can comment below on this YouTube video if you're on YouTube, and you can drop us a comment on any of those if you're on iTunes. If you like the show, feel free to like it so we get out in front of a few more people, and you can feel free to subscribe to it so you don't miss anything we post. It's 6:30 Monday for YouTube and much, much earlier that day for iTunes. Thank you, Mr. Crawford, for joining me.
It's been good.
It's been lovely, and I will speak to you next week. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, the game is well and truly finito.